Welcome to the Crypto CEO Show. We have Greg Lang with us. He's the founder at rivet.cloud. Greg has an interesting background. So the three co-founders at rivet.cloud, but he's a polymath and autodidact with formal education, law advocacy, and humanities. So self-taught himself, entrepreneurship, leadership. ML, blockchains, crypto, NFTs, and all that good stuff. So this one should be a cool one. He's in Kansas City. I'm in Oaxaca, Mexico. Podpire.com is presenting this podcast. If you're seeking to start and scale a podcast to get leads, to get investors on a first conversation, which is a podcast call, and close a couple into clients, you can go to podpire.com. We have a free ebook showing you how to do that at scale. Greg, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Awesome. Well, Charles, thanks for having me, by the way. I'm really glad you reached out. So with Rivet, we are really focused on building infrastructure mostly. So in blockchain, there's this thing called node infrastructure, and you have to, I mean, I don't know how much you know about this. Is this a new area for you or?
No, no, it's not.
Okay. So you're familiar with what a node infrastructure operator does. So like sort of Infura or things like that. It's a piece of software for people who don't know that has to run in the back end of any application that connects to Web3. And if you don't have that, it won't work. So people, typically would stand them up on their own back in the early days, but that became quickly, obviously problematic once you had to run two of them, right? Because running one is fine, but running two behind a load balancer starts to introduce problems. So we got into that space when our first company decided to pivot because we were in the order book space, and that was around the time the SEC was getting aggressive. So uh, these days we're actually working on a decentralized infrastructure project with a couple other partners in the space, and we're very excited about it.
Right. And how did you first get into crypto?
Kind Allow me to tell a story because this actually it goes all the way back to 2010. I had just gotten out of law school. I worked for this guy who, had a practice that he no longer needed to open because we ended up winning a pretty big case. Um, and so I had to find something new to do, and I was already to the point where I'd done enough business contracts. Right, I was doing contract practice basically. That I knew I didn't like it too much. Right, I always felt like I was dealing with the problems of these really cool businesses, and I just always felt like I was on the wrong side of the fence. So I reached out to a buddy of mine who I knew was working for a software company that did legislative software. So I thought, I don't have software experience, but I have law experience. Maybe there's a fit. And I ended up working on the Indiana legislature's voting system and some of their data systems. We ended up building that around 2013, 2014. And that was where I met my two co-founders. So after that project and a couple years of interlude, because I stuck around Indiana to help them finish up that system after the contract ended, um, that was when we decided to start Open Relay, which was open source order book software. And that was all based on a hackathon run by the ZeroX project. And that was how we got into business. And then Rivet came about because node infrastructure was the hardest part of our stack to run. And we were actually pretty good at it. So that's really how I got here. Longer term, I guess you would say I was a cypherpunk in the '90s. I was a kid living in the Midwest of Kansas who was bored all the time, and I just read the forums and really got into the ideas of liberty through technology.
Right. And yeah, what's your long-term vision of it? Because we're seeing Bitcoin price being
Mhm.
higher than ever. We're seeing US adopt it as in its reserve currency. So do you think it's growing, it's going in the right direction, or it's gonna all fall apart sometime?
I don't think it's all going to fall apart. I do think that there's a little bit of nearsightedness. Like, I don't think that people quite get yet that blockchain technology really is just an upgraded version of the database. And yes, it's well suited to solve finance problems. And yeah, it's well suited to solve problems in the administration of securities and things like that. But it's also well suited to solve a lot of other problems that it hasn't even started to touch yet. And I think that's where the real magic is. So I don't know how the finance thing is going to go. I think there's probably too much intervention in uh, the financial markets and in money already going on that sort of make it an unstable system already, and stabilizing that with technology is going to be a hard sell, like a tough road to hoe. But I do think the technology in the long run is going to ultimately replace all the other databases that we need to have in public and reconcile across distances. So ultimately the future of it is probably secure, regardless of how the finance side of it works out.
Right. And what was the initial idea behind Rivet in 2018? Why did you decided to go full time into this?
Well, so I love builders, and I always get so excited when I see somebody building something great. And I do believe that in order for the world to move forward, especially with automation coming out, that we need to be working on ways to free up and make it really easy to innovate and really easy to get your idea out there. And one of the hugest challenges was, like I said, running that node infrastructure. I mean, these things, just to give people a sense, right? The deal with these is you have to sync the whole blockchain up to a node, and then from there you have to be able to support an application that ideally scales globally in terms of reads and writes, and the writes part isn't as hard because that's kind of controlled by the throughput of the blockchain itself, but the reads can get really intensive, and if you have an app that suddenly gets really successful, if you're not prepared for it, you can be a victim of your own success. Your own great idea can be the reason your great idea goes offline and people stop using it, just by dint of numbers. And so what we did with Rivet was try to make it easy for people to get in and sign up for node infrastructure that we know we can run at any scale. And there was, I mean, that's the short version. There were 3 or 4 years of really intense building behind the technology that went into it. And the way we approached it was actually kind of like solving a new problem with an old technique. I don't know if you are terribly familiar with database tech, but in the 70s they invented this thing called streaming replication, right? And that's how databases scale out. And so we decided to apply the same thing to node infrastructure, and that's how we got to build this thing that we could cheaply scale.
Right. And how many customers do you have? How many users per day? How many requests per day?
Well, it's hard to say because we run we run for projects that have a lot of users. So I don't know exactly the number of people that use us, that access us, but I can tell you that we run anywhere from 1 billion to, in a heavy month, 3 billion requests per month or so.
Okay. And so the model here, I think you're charging point 25 cents per 100K request, right? So
Mhm.
typically, who will actually use you? What's your ideal customer persona?
We've targeted developers mainly. Our goal was always to be, so the key insight that we took from, right, is I don't know if you remember the late 20 teens or the early 20 teens, I suppose, where bring your device to work kind of started to become a thing, that if you had that as a perk, people would show up, right? You could take all of the people who wanted to use their own devices off the hands of anybody who was restrictive about it. And it was a great way to get employees, because people hate using the crap that other people build for them to drive. Like they don't want to build, they don't want to use the work Microsoft machine if they can bring their Mac to work, right? Or use their iPhone instead of the company BlackBerry. And companies like that too, because it's cheaper, right? Uh, this is the thing that I noticed is companies that did that got tool adoption better. They got it faster. Like the place that I worked, the Indiana State House, you would normally think of government as being super quick to adopt new tech. We started using Slack right away because they allowed bring your own device. Like literally as soon as somebody heard about it, it was just on the office system. And when management found out about it, it was because they needed to sign up for it to talk to everybody, not because they were deciding whether or not to give it to everybody. So we wanted to make this thing accessible to the developer directly, so that when shops or projects were trying to figure out what to use, then hopefully, if we've done our job, then developers are already using it. And so the conversation is quick and simple as to what we choose.
Right. And at this point, you said you're like four co-founders in that one.
Uh, just myself and two others. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And yeah, Rivet, it's fair to assume that it pays the bills for everyone. So where do you want to scale it in the next couple of years?
Yeah, interestingly enough, our goal is to put ourselves out of business. And it sounds, I meant for that to sound kind of blunt, but the fact of the matter is we're actually working on a project with Infura right now to spin out what we're going to call the decentralized infrastructure network. And it's going to subsume Rivet into that. Like our efforts are mainly in building tech that was going to scale at an open source level that you could then build into a decentralized marketplace. We've been for the last year or so working with them to build the decentralized marketplace element. And April, I think, is our target they're spinning out a foundation, and then we're going to start from there to build out from there. So Rivet will soon be part of the DIN Foundation. Yeah.
Right. And why is decentralization important?
Well, it's very easy to get at the bottom of this one, right? I don't know if you ever had a Parlor account or not, whether or not you
Nope.
used it or just used it to watch, right? It was very interesting conversations going on there because that's where all the people who weren't able to speak certain opinions on X were headed. And what happened to that project was telling, right? Uh, I think it was January of 2022 or 23, I forget exactly when. Uh, the folks who were trying to shut down conversations put pressure on Amazon, right? They said, hey, uh, AWS, you need to kick this company off. And they turned off their infrastructure. And that was that. And it was gone, right? Like the whole project, this idea of free anything, can't survive in a system where authorities can either with a cease and desist letter or SWAT teams shut down a server. So how do you solve that problem? Because you can't, like software, you can't build decentralized servers on other servers. That doesn't make any sense, right? What you really need is the ability for people to run a small set of capacity, like a small number of servers or a small number of virtual machines in some cloud service or another, so that if you take out one, that this whole service by itself doesn't terribly care, right? So imagine trying to shut down Parlor, but when Amazon turned it off, the automatic marketplace that Parlor was connected to just automatically picked the next best provider that was available, right? They wouldn't bother trying to shut down everybody if everybody could do that seamlessly. It wouldn't be worth the trouble. It'd be a game of whack-a-mole. They couldn't win. And so the goal for decentralization is to make it so that the internet is durable regardless of who's in power.
Right. And you're saying that anytime a movement gathers traction, there's going to be a bigger power that's going to try to stop it. Do you think
Not
AI?
necessarily
Yeah,
every
go ahead.
time. Yeah, I'd say not necessarily every time, but enough times where it's a risk, right? It's a risk that has to be planned for and probably inhibits some people from trying some projects that would be really beneficial to humanity, but would butt up against authorities in a way that would be uncomfortable.
Right. Do you think power should be AI managed or parts of it? Do you have faith in humanity for keeping making good decisions that will scale over the long term, or should we hand this out to an AI that is more stable, mature, and less emotional?
Um, I think AI has a place in our society that's more integrated with people than adversarial to it. I don't think that you would want a system that was just fully automated, but I also don't think that's what any of us are going to build, right? I think we're going to have a collaborative relationship with that kind of AI. But yes, I do think that an AI that comes back and tells the people that are responsible for leadership something very important that they should be able to, without any transparency, ignore its advice, right? This is where blockchain and AI play nicely together because you can have a recommender AI whose model we can vet without having to trust anybody specific, right? Because if the models are pointed to using blockchain, for example, by hashing the model files and making sure that they're not tampered with, we can make sure there's one that we trust based on how it's been trained. And from there, we can also have its recommendations hashed so that we know that they're not being monkeyed with. And if somebody goes against the AI and we've known based on its track record that it's smarter, right, then they would be held accountable for that. And there may be times when we do want to go against what the AI is advising because human values are not the same thing as intelligence, right? Sometimes they have more to do with what we care about than with what we know. And I think that's something we can avoid losing without also sacrificing the benefits of AI.
Right. And regarding privacy and power, you've mentioned via email, I think it was yesterday, Roman storms, tornado cash case. What would that mean for the industry?
This is a dangerous one. So, for the longest time, technology has been based on, especially internet technology and software, has been based on open source projects. Microsoft didn't like to admit it in the early 2000s and late 90s, but even they were relying on open source libraries. Everything from uh, you know the email protocol and the HTTP standard to simple things like one of the things that my co-founder Austin, who's my best friend, but also our tech, like our real tech guy who actually builds stuff, he once said to me that he wants to be remembered like the guy who wrote the zip file was. The zip file was this awesome standard because it allowed for people to trade files that were compressed. And yeah, you could do other things, but the zip file was really neat and it ended up catching on culturally, right? I think that the open source software is the key to maintaining innovation. Now, if we have a situation where developers can get in trouble because someone takes their software that they built, open source, published online for anybody to go use, and does something evil with it, that they can now become a conspirator in a federal crime. Like, that's not right. These people are trying to build tools for other people to use. And yeah, some people would say that privacy that's perfect is dangerous. But privacy that's imperfect is worse, right? We have too many people out there who actually need to keep secrets. I think it was Timothy May said, privacy is the right to selectively reveal oneself to the world. And we should grant people that right, not for what the worst of it will be, but for what the best of it will be, right? And I think if we lose sight of all the good things it does, that it's very easy to say if you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to hide. But in a world like that, nobody would be allowed to wear clothes, right? Because clothes are a privacy tool, ultimately, even in a way. And these are just things that I think are fundamental to human experience. That without them, we will miss them. But with them, we don't really appreciate them because they're so fundamental. It's like the air we breathe, or like fish in water. They don't see it.
Right. When you develop a product, think the best scenario possible would be to control bad use case, right? Even like in the open source code, have an AI to monitor who deploys it or not. Like it, because
Mhm.
if I'm deploying something out there, I don't want to feel responsible for a terrorist using my
Mhm.
software to fund his operation, right? What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, yeah, if we could do it, right? If it were possible. I think the danger there is what's bad and what's good is defined by a political process that sometimes breaks down, right? Where the people being targeted by it are not criminals, they're just people. A great example is how we once upon a time in basically all of the world outlawed gay couples having any kind of relationship other than friends, right? You can go in a bedroom and not worry about the government snooping at your window so they could arrest you. Um, and now we know that's wrong. But for a lot of times, like, I mean, Alan Turing, the freaking inventor of the computer, died because he was given hormones to make him not be gay because the UK at the time believed they could drug him out of his alleged criminal habit. But we look back on that with disgust. But what things like that are we doing today that we have hubris about? That one day we'll look back and say that was an atrocity. If we can avoid building that into our technology, then yeah, we should try to stop bad actors. But I don't think the that our technology is capable of doing that because I don't think we're capable of doing that. I think the only way that we can be sure that we're not persecuting people is making sure that it persecutes nobody by not giving it the power to.
Right. Yeah, and it's an accomplish that's big enough to release something that's open source out there for most to benefit. Is that that's sometimes a fallacy with the crypto world. It's like overly libertarian, and there's a lot of people that abuse of it. So think I mean it's the same with Facebook, right? But I do think that they invested tons in trying to make their platform quote unquote safer. And yes, legal is not equal to ethical and what is right. Yeah, and I think just prosecuting innovators, generally speaking, is just sending an obvious message to founders, right? It's like don't start a business,
Right.
don't try to do something innovative, right? That will add value. So it's a very bad message in the end. And
Hmm.
regarding that, do you think governments are going to scale? Do you think countries are still going to be a thing 10 to 20 years from now with Balaji's sovereign state book? Do you feel that governments are losing power with time?
Well, uh, 10 to 20 years is a long time. So first off, predictions are predictions, and I don't want to say this with too much certainty, but I do think that they're going to have to adapt. And this is because it will soon be possible for a lot of different kinds of societal organization tools to work instead, right? People want their governments to be like services. They really do. And people want to have governments, right? Like they don't want to live in a world where unless you can afford police because you're rich enough to be able to pay for a security company, that you're not going to be safe, right? We don't want to live in that kind of world. That's a dangerous place that we left behind by having governments to begin with. But the problem is always in stopping them from creeping too far. And right now, they're not subject to much pressure at all. But I do think things like network states and sort of these upstart cities that are run by some group or some DAO or something like that, those are going to become more and more attractive as they mature. I mean, heck, we may even have the opportunity to form some kind of brand new government on Mars within the next 20 or 30 years. They will be under pressure to compete with those new ways of organizing, and if they don't adapt, they won't survive. Whether or not that will happen, whether or not they will survive, is up in the air. But at the rate they're going, I'm frankly not too optimistic, at least for them.
Right. Yeah, I'm of the same opinion. One thing I think is nice for the storm case, and also I believe the Pertsev case is the fact that in this modern age, if you have like a community and if people think it's unfair, at least people will fund you
Hmm.
to go through trial, right? Like I think
Yes.
that's a pretty fun thing, the community aspect in crypto, right?
Yeah. Oh, and it's how you find other people who share your beliefs, right? Because ultimately, at the core of the Storm case and the Pertsev case is this idea that if you build something that someone uses for bad, then you should be punished for it. Like it'd be like going after the CEO of Toyota every time someone bombs a Capitol building or whatever with a car bomb that happens to be a Toyota, right? That would be silly. That would be unfair. It's not justice. What it is power protecting itself. And uh, the cool thing about Roman's case is they've got a really great DAO setup. So I don't know if this is the right time, but we want justicedao.org is where you go if you want to help him out and help his family out. I mean, he was arrested in front of his daughter. You know, uh, they pulled him out of his house, and this guy's a software developer. Like I've met him, I've talked to the guy. He's like the biggest, like most lovable nerd on the face of the planet. Just a nice person. He didn't get into this to upend the world. He got into it because he cares about privacy continuing to exist for his daughter in the future. And I think people should go there and support him definitely. They
Right,
take
right, for
cash
sure.
and crypto too, by the way. For anybody who's interested, if you don't have crypto, you can still donate.
Yeah, in nuking the whole ecosystem has never been a positive thing to do, generally speaking, right? Like I think it's just like legal laziness, right? You want to
Hmm.
fix this problem that this bad guy that's using X code to do this transaction, but then you kill the full ecosystem. You throw the baby with the bathwater. It's
Right.
very
Well, I
lazy,
mean, it's lazy and it's ineffective, right? Like that's
right?
the worst part of it is like, as far as solving societal problems, one of the
Yeah, they'll
most
just switch to
expensive,
another
right?
solution.
One of the most expensive and least effective systems we have is the system we use to stop financial crime. It could be better. It could be insanely better if we worked on it, or maybe also instead went back to the old-fashioned idea that we should police with police instead of police with banks. Um, I don't know if those people really enjoy being conscripted into that kind of service because they got into finance to
No, they
help people.
don't.
And I don't think the experiment's borne out because like something to the tune of more than $300 billion were spent globally on these systems that are supposed to interdict this stuff. In 2022, I think it was when the number was from, and yet their effectiveness is they've stopped less than 1% of all illicit financial flows year over year. And no matter how much they throw at it, it doesn't get better; it just gets more expensive.
Yeah, well, I think it's a gerontocracy, not to get in the conspiracy theorist area, but that there's definitely rules and laws do serve the elites way more than they serve the starters, the upcomers, right?
Mm-hmm.
These big banks, they're professionals at knowing these laws, at lobbying, and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. And I think it just keeps them in that solid mold. I think it's gonna change over time. Definitely, we
Yeah.
want to favor innovation. We want people to understand that investing in this new innovation might be risky, right? Like someone give them
Mm-hmm.
an education, but also is it the government's role to educate people about what they should
Right.
invest or not invest in?
Oh yeah. Well, I
Aren't
mean,
aren't people like learning by failing? Like that's
well,
so.
and in the 1920s when they first came up with these systems, right? This idea of the SEC even was is a
Yeah,
really great example. The way that people were getting defrauded was they were trying to invest over the phone with brokers, and that at
yeah,
that time you literally had to call somebody in New
a
York.
mail order as well.
Yeah, and the only time in most towns, in the United States at least, the financial news came out was on the Sunday paper. So they have 1 week to front run everybody based on the news that they could, manipulate by pushing what was going to get talked about, and they could push what was going to get talked about by pump and dump, right? Like this is where the idea of asynchrony or the information asynchrony thing came from, where some people have insider knowledge and they act on it to the disadvantage of everybody else. We don't have that anymore. We have more literacy in this country, in the world, than we ever had back when these systems were created. We have people who are learning tech from the time they can walk. These folks are not unsophisticated. They're just not being taught these things because there's this whole professional class that wants to keep the institutions that pay their checks alive.
Right.
And we should be getting past the point where investors are these little people that need our protection because we're smart and they're not, or they can't read or whatever. That's it's not the world we live in. Everybody can read. We need we need
Right.
to we need to respect how society has changed and how technology has enabled us to all to be deprofessionalizing certain and democratizing certain things that used to need people to care for them. Like that's okay that we needed that in the 40s and the 50s, maybe even the 60s, but we don't need that anymore. We can unwind some of these systems and give it to people.
Right. Ultimately, I think everyone has ChatGPT or can have ChatGPT, right? Of course, there's always special cases, and yes, I think most humans are charitable and are willing to help these people.
Mhm.
But an AI will tell you the level of risk of a project, right? For
They
example, in
will.
which yeah, it's like 75% chance of getting your money back, 10% of being
Hmm.
totally scammed. So I think with these technologies in our hand, and we can even potentially labor that this founder has a track record of scamming, and
Right.
oh, maybe that founder changed because of
Yeah.
XYZ. I think that is available to us right now, and we can make sound decisions
Oh,
over
right.
it.
One question or one thing I would have everybody try that is on ChatGPT or Grok or whatever one you use is ask it to give you a swag. This is an acronym for scientific wild ass guess, for people
Okay.
who don't know what that means. Give me a swag about the likelihood or not likelihood of, and insert the thing you want to know about. And where it will not speculate if you don't give it this, it will speculate for you and give you its best shot. And if you use this to check out any company, it's going to tell you the truth about the likelihood of success. And it's not high, right? People will recognize they're taking big risks if we give them the chance to try.
Right. Love that. Where can people find out more about you, Greg?
You can find me on X, LinkedIn, or any other platform where the search comes back positive for @DesignHeretic, all one word.
So that was Greg Lang. And